Let's jump right into this explainer. The sinking of the Titanic is, without a doubt, the most famous maritime disaster in history. But today, we're zooming past those broad strokes you've heard a million times to uncover the real, hidden facts. We're going to track a timeline that essentially acts like a ticking clock, starting from sheer, unbounded human ambition and ending in absolute tragedy. It leaves us looking at this brilliant, haunting question. How on earth could the world's most luxurious, technologically advanced passenger ship just disappear beneath the Atlantic Ocean on its very first voyage? Well, to find out, we've got to strictly separate the myths from the facts and understand exactly how this seemingly invincible vessel vanished so incredibly fast. So let's kick things off with Section 1, Birth of the Titanic. Now, it all started with this massive, wildly ambitious vision from the White Star Line, which was brought into physical reality at the Harland Wolff shipyard over in Belfast. And the sheer engineering scale here was just breathtaking. We're talking about a mammoth vessel weighing over 46,000 tons and stretching nearly 900 feet long. But it wasn't just about building something enormous, right? It was about outfitting it with unprecedented, jaw-dropping luxury. I mean, we're talking about an onboard heated swimming pool, a squash court, and opulent Turkish baths. Grasping the staggering scale and the supreme confidence of the people who built it really sets the stage for understanding why absolutely everyone believed this thing was truly unsinkable. Moving right along to Section 2, Passengers and Hidden Facts. So while the public saw this completely flawless, glamorous launch, the reality behind the scenes was actually incredibly turbulent. For starters, there was a massive national coal strike happening with around 1 million miners, causing severe delays all across Britain. To make sure the Titanic had enough fuel to even leave the dock, the White Star Line had to take extreme measures. They literally canceled the journeys of their other ships, like the Oceanic and the Majestic, just to siphon their coal over to the Titanic. Crazy, right? And at the exact same time, the launch was facing unexpected, last-minute reshuffling among the senior crew. It just shows you that this maiden voyage was scrambling under immense logistical pressure before a single passenger even stepped foot on board. Which brings us to Section 3, the maiden voyage begins. Despite all those chaotic pre-departure headaches, the journey officially kicked off. Looking at day 1, it started with a grand departure from Southampton, England on April 10th. By the evening of that very same day, the Titanic made a brief stop in Cherbourg, France, to pick up more passengers. Then, moving into day 2, we see the final European stop in Queenstown, Ireland, which we now know as Cove. And these initial stops are absolutely crucial because they represent the ship's final moments of connection to land. Once those anchors were raised in Queenstown, the ship and the roughly 2,200 people on board were fully committed to the vast open ocean. During these early days at sea, life on board was defined by absolute opulence, incredible entertainment, and cutting-edge technology. But here is the key takeaway, and why this really matters. That perfectly curated environment projected a powerful, yet entirely false sense of total security. The unmatched luxury quite literally masked the severe physical dangers of the North Atlantic. Think about it. When you're dining on multi-course meals right under glowing crystal chandeliers, it completely overrides your natural human instinct to worry about the freezing, deadly ocean sitting just inches away on the other side of a steel hull. Okay, let's get into Section 4, Ice Warnings and Collision. Out in those icy waters, a critical breakdown in the chain of vital information started to unfold. Throughout the early hours and straight into the midday, the ship's wireless operators received at least 6 distinct ice warnings from other vessels in the area. 6! Now, Captain Edward Smith was actively assessing the navigation, and he even altered the ship's course slightly southward. However, the Titanic still maintained its super high speed of 22 knots. By nightfall, the conditions in the North Atlantic had become exceptionally perilous. You had this flat, calm sea, which actually makes icebergs nearly impossible to spot because there are no waves breaking against them to give them away. So you take those worsening conditions, pair them with a dismissal of key warnings by overworked radio operators, and you get a rapidly narrowing window for survival. The danger was clearly known, but the response tragically just didn't match the severity of the threat. And then, the chaotic final sequence unfolded in a matter of frantic, terrifying moments. The warning bell rang out 3 sharp times as Lookout Frederick Fleet spotted the dark shape of the iceberg looming dead ahead. The crew's reaction was immediate and desperate. First Officer William Murdoch shouted urgent bridge commands, ordering the wheel hard a starboard, while simultaneously throwing the engine telegraphs into reverse. But the ship was just too massive and moving way too fast. The Titanic sustained absolutely devastating damage as it scraped along the ice for roughly 300 feet, popping rivets and buckling the steel hull plates wide open to the sea. Every single rapid-fire reaction during those few critical minutes permanently sealed the fate of thousands. Finally, we reach Section 5. Could it be prevented? Having examined all this hidden historical context, from the desperate coal strikes and the chaotic crew changes to the mishandling of those early wireless warnings and the frantic final moments before impact, you really have to wonder, could this whole disaster still have been prevented? If just one tiny piece of this giant puzzle fell differently, say if the wireless operators had just passed along that final critical ice warning, or if the initial bridge commands were given mere seconds earlier, how might history have changed? It's a haunting thought, for sure, and one that reminds us how a series of small, seemingly manageable events can snowball into an unimaginable tragedy. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this deeper dive brought a completely new perspective to a story you thought you already knew.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the most famous, intensely debated, and heavily dramatized events in human history. But our goal here is pretty simple, though absolutely crucial. We are going to separate the Hollywood blockbusters and the rumors from cold, hard historical reality. We want to uncover the actual anatomy of a disaster. What truly sank the Titanic? Well, we're going to look strictly at the historical evidence to find out.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand the why, we really need to look at the when. So today, we're going through the sinking timeline, hidden facts and decisions, investigating the tragedy, debunking popular myths, and finally, the modern maritime legacy.
Section 1. The sinking timeline. So picture this. A totally quiet night turns into absolute chaos in a matter of hours. At 11:40 p.m., the ship strikes the iceberg. But it takes a full 35 minutes before the very first distress calls even go out at 12:15 a.m. By 12:45, they're finally launching the first lifeboats into the freezing Atlantic. And yeah, all of this is happening with the incredibly surreal backdrop of the ship's band literally playing on the deck to try and calm the panic. Then, at 2:20 a.m., the ship takes its final plunge. In under 3 hours, the largest moving object ever built by human hands was just gone. But look, an iceberg alone doesn't entirely explain this terrifyingly fast timeline. What hidden flaws made this massive ship fail so quickly?
Which brings us to Section 2, Hidden Facts and Decisions. When you look at the historical record, it reveals some absolutely fatal engineering flaws. First off, there were late design changes that actually compromised the height of the watertight bulkheads inside the hull. So instead of being fully sealed off as the ship tilted, water just spilled over from one compartment to the next, kind of like water spilling over an ice cube tray. Second, modern analysis of the wreckage showed the ship contained dangerously weak rivets that simply popped right off under the immense pressure of the collision. These physical compromises basically sealed the ship's fate, but, the physical ship wasn't the only thing that failed that night.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how cutting-edge technology actually hindered the rescue. The Marconi wireless was this incredible, game-changing innovation, right? It allowed ships to communicate across the ocean for the first time. But the problem was, the airwaves were just completely flooded. Passenger messages, like personal telegrams, were prioritized, and critical incoming ice warnings were either missed or totally ignored. When the actual distress calls finally did go out, the resulting communications bottleneck created massive confusion, and that chaos set the stage for a tale of two very, very different nearby ships.
On one side, we have the Californian. This ship was astonishingly close to the Titanic, and despite physically seeing distress flares lighting up the night sky, the Californian just stayed put. It's a baffling, almost unbelievable inaction. But contrast that with the Carpathia. The moment they received that distress signal, the Carpathia pushed her engines to their absolute breaking point, navigating dangerously through those exact same ice fields in the pitch black to reach the survivors. The Carpathia's heroic response and the Californian's failure to act directly impacted the grim statistics we're about to look at next.
Because when you look at the survival stats, the divide is, well, it's pretty stark. While a really high percentage of first-class passengers survived, those figures just dropped precipitously for second-class, third-class, and the crew. Yet hidden right there within these numbers are some incredibly powerful, lesser-known stories of real heroes. Crew members who consciously stayed at their posts deep in the ship just to keep the lights on as long as possible, and passengers who willingly gave up their seats in the lifeboats. With such staggering, heartbreaking losses, the immediate question for the public was, how on earth would the world react?
Let's look at Section 3, Investigating the Tragedy.
And this brilliantly illustrates how two different nations approach the exact same disaster, demanding answers but from very different angles. The British inquiry leaned heavily into the navigation choices and the real-time actions of the crew on the ground. Meanwhile, the American inquiry took a totally different route, focusing heavily on corporate responsibility, interrogating the owners of the White Star Line, and highlighting the glaring lack of maritime safety regulations. But while their primary focuses differed, both of these inquiries neutrally evaluated the evidence, and their major findings ultimately converged. They both agreed the industry needed massive, immediate reform.
But here is a fascinating gap in the historical timeline: 1985. Think about that. Despite those rigorous investigations back in 1912, it took over 7 decades and a deep-sea exploration expedition equipped with some serious modern technology to finally locate the actual wreck of the Titanic on the ocean floor. And because the ship lay hidden in the dark for so long, a massive wave of cultural myths, legends, and wild theories just grew to fill that void.
Which brings us to Section 4, Debunking Popular Myths. You've definitely heard these two before. They're probably the most famous questions out there. Was the ship actually marketed as unsinkable? And is it true that third-class passengers were maliciously locked below decks to prioritize the wealthy? Let's strip away the movie plots and look exclusively at what the historical evidence tells us.
So the crucial point is this: yes, the Titanic absolutely was described in pre-voyage marketing and trade journals as practically unsinkable. That really did fuel the hubris of the era. Now, as for the locked gates, the evidence shows those gates did physically exist. But actually, scratch the malicious plot idea. They were a strict requirement of U.S. immigration laws for disease control and quarantine, not some coordinated attack on the poor. Oh, and as for those spooky stories of an ancient mummy's curse sinking the ship, there is absolutely zero historical evidence to support that. But debunking that one leads us directly to an even wilder, surprisingly persistent theory:
the switch theory. This is a massive conspiracy claiming that the White Star Line actually swapped their previously damaged sister ship, the Olympic, for the Titanic to execute a massive insurance scam. It sounds like a great movie plot, right? However, when we neutrally examine the actual evidence, the overwhelming structural proof entirely disproves it. The shipyard build numbers stamped onto the parts, the specific physical layout of the windows, and the actual artifacts recovered from that 1985 wreck all definitively say Titanic. The conspiracies simply don't hold water. But what is undeniably real is the lasting legacy this tragedy left behind.
Section 5, The Modern Maritime Legacy.
You've likely never heard of it, but SOLAS is quite literally the reason you are safe on a modern cruise ship today. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea was born directly from the ashes of the Titanic disaster. It is a comprehensive global maritime treaty that completely rewrote the rules of the ocean. Let's look at the exact real-world steps it implemented.
SOLAS mandated simple but absolutely critical changes. Step 1, no more guessing games. Every single ship must have sufficient lifeboats for every single soul on board. Period. Step 2, establishing 24-hour radio watches, so a distress call is literally never missed again. And Step 3, the creation of the International Ice Patrol. This is an organization that still exists today, actively monitoring icebergs to keep shipping lanes safe. These changes are profound, and they bring us to the ultimate question of this whole explainer. Ultimately, what really caused the Titanic disaster? When we strip away the myths, the movies, and just look at the hard data, historians agree that you simply cannot point to just one single element. It wasn't just an iceberg. It wasn't just some weak rivets. It was a catastrophic alignment of failures.
It was, tragically, the perfect storm. A fatal intersection of human error in ignoring those ice warnings, combined with extreme environmental conditions on a totally moonless night, the hidden limits of early 20th century technology, and completely inadequate safety regulations. The Titanic wasn't just defeated by nature, it was defeated by systemic human overconfidence. And as we look back at the ship sitting at the bottom of the ocean today, it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. In our modern age of boundless engineering, AI, and massive vessels, are we still capable of building our own unsinkable ships, only to be humbled by the forces we simply cannot control? Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning. I'll see you next time.